I was 14 when my father's Cessna 172 tried to kill us both. We were on final approach to a small Kentucky airfield when the invisible hand of wind shear grabbed our aircraft and threw it toward the earth like a discarded toy. One moment we were descending normally at 500 feet. The next, we were plummeting at twice our approach, speed the ground rushing up through the windscreen with terrifying velocity. My hands froze on the controls. The stall warning horn screamed. The altimeter spun backward like a broken clock. Every instinct told me to yank back on the yoke to fight the aircraft's dive with everything I had. Easy, Sarah. My father's voice cut through my panic calm as still water. His hands covered mine on the controls, preventing the violent correction that would have stalled us into the ground. Feel what the aircraft is telling you. Small corrections, not big ones. His touch guided my hands through tiny, precise inputs. A gentle back pressure here, a slight power adjustment there. The Cessna's nose came up, gradually trading altitude for airspeed until we were flying again instead of falling. We touched down 30 seconds later, my heart hammering against my ribs like a caged bird. "The aircraft wanted to fly," he said as we taxied to parking, his weathered pilot's hands steady on the controls. "It always wants to fly. You just have to listen to what it's trying to tell you." Colonel David Chen died 3 years later in Baghdad, bringing wounded soldiers home in a damaged Black Hawk. But his lesson lived on in his daughter's hands, waiting for the day when 492 American soldiers would need it to survive. The emergency klaxon at Fort Campbell shattered the pre-dawn silence like a sledgehammer through glass. I was already awake in my quarters at 5:23 hours, reviewing weather reports and maintenance logs, habits my father had beaten into me during our weekend flights. In 8 years of Army aviation, I'd learned that preparation was the thin line between coming home and coming home in a flag-draped box. The briefing room filled quickly, 12 pilots clustering around a tactical display that showed our worst nightmare: Delta Company 2nd Battalion, 503rd Infantry Regiment, 492 soldiers trapped in a valley 30 kilometers inside enemy territory. Intelligence failures had walked them into a coordinated ambush, and now surface-to-air missiles controlled every piece of high ground around them. Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison looked like he'd aged a decade in 4 hours. He paced behind the display, his usual command presence replaced by something approaching desperation. "3 aircraft down in as many hours," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of failed rescue attempts. "Chinook, Black Hawk, another Apache. The enemy repositioned SAM sites overnight. We have maybe 3 hours before weather shuts us down completely." Captain Marcus Webb stood at the back of the room, his jaw tight with frustration. Webb was old-school Army, 38 years old, veteran of 3 deployments, and carrying invisible scars from watching his co-pilot freeze during a firefight in Afghanistan. That moment of hesitation had cost them both, Webb with a Purple Heart and chronic back pain, his co-pilot with a memorial service and a folded flag. "Sir," Webb said, studying the tactical overlay, "with those SAM sites active, this is Air Force territory. We need bombers to clear the high ground before risking more rotary wing assets." Morrison shook his head, his pacing intensifying. "Negative. Civilians in the area plus Delta Company is mixed in with friendly Iraqi positions. One errant bomb creates an international incident. This has to be surgical precision extraction only." I studied the terrain while the debate continued around me. The valley was a death funnel, narrow approach, corridors overlapping missile coverage, only 2 possible landing zones under direct enemy observation. Quick mental calculations painted a grim picture: 492 soldiers, maximum 12 per trip, with stripped equipment, 15 minutes per round trip including combat loading. Even perfect execution would require over 40 trips, mathematically impossible in our weather window. "I need volunteers," Morrison said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I won't order anyone into this. The survival probability is minimal." Silence filled the room like a physical weight. 12 combat pilots, men who'd flown through enemy fire and lived to brag about it, suddenly found their boots intensely fascinating. "I'll take it," I said quietly. The room's temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Webb's head snapped toward me, his expression mixing genuine concern with something that might have been respect. "Chen," he said carefully, "this isn't a training exercise. We're talking about 500 lives depending on flawless execution under conditions that have already killed 3 crews. I understand the stakes, Captain." I moved to the tactical display, my mind already calculating approach vectors and emergency procedures. Northern corridor avoids 2 SAM sites, gives us the best LZ access. Nap of the Earth profile until final approach should keep us below radar until we're committed. Morrison stopped pacing, studying me with the intensity of a man drowning and seeing a rope. Extraction methodology, multiple trips combat loading stripped equipment. We can carry 12 soldiers per cycle if we move fast. I met Webb's eyes across the room. "I know it's dangerous, Marcus, but those soldiers are dying while we debate mathematics." Webb's expression shifted, something hard and protective, giving way to reluctant admiration. "Sarah, after what happened to Jackson?" He trailed off, referencing his lost co-pilot without saying the name. "I just can't watch another good pilot die because we sent them into an impossible situation." "Then don't watch," I replied. "Help. Are you volunteering for this mission?" 30 seconds of silence stretched like an hour. No hands raised. No voices spoke. "Chen," Morrison said finally, "you're authorized for immediate departure. Apache 77 Alpha maximum fuel and ammunition. Call sign, Lifeline 1. Chief Warrant Officer Angela Torres appeared at my elbow as I headed for the flight line. Torres was more than just my co-pilot. She was a systems savant from East LA, who could coax performance from avionics that most technicians couldn't achieve with a full maintenance bay. "Ma'am, requesting permission to fly this mission," she said, her voice steady, despite the fear I could see in her eyes. I studied her face, 26 years old, married, twin daughters Sophia and Elena at home. "Angela, this is likely a one-way trip. Those 492 soldiers have families, too." She hefted her helmet and flight gear. "Plus, you can't handle all the systems alone. Someone needs to manage weapons communications and defensive countermeasures while you fly. That someone is me." She was right. Having Torres along would significantly improve our odds of survival and mission success. "Angela," I said as we approached the Apache, "if something happens out there—" "Nothing's going to happen," she interrupted firmly. "Sophia asked me what helicopters do. I told her they bring daddies home safe. That's what we're going to do." The Apache AH-64E came alive under my hands, like a predator awakening. Twin General Electric T700 turboshafts wound up with their characteristic whine, 1/800 shaft horsepower each, turning the 4-blade main rotor that would either save 492 lives or add 2 more names to the memorial wall. "Lifeline 1 tower control, you are cleared for immediate departure. Weather window closing rapidly. You have 3 hours maximum before conditions become unsurvivable." "Tower Lifeline 1, understood. Departing now." I lifted the Apache from the tarmac and immediately dropped to 50 feet above ground level, beginning the nap of the Earth flight that would take us into the teeth of concentrated enemy fire. The landscape blurred past at 180 miles per hour, trees, buildings, terrain, features flashing by while I plotted courses around known threat areas. "Contact was," Torres announced 15 minutes into the flight, her voice tight with professional concentration. "Multiple radar signatures ahead. 3 confirmed SAM sites with overlapping coverage zones." I banked left, following a river valley that would take us around the northernmost missile position. The Apache handled like a precision instrument at this altitude, responding to control inputs with the sensitivity of a surgeon's scalpel. "Time to target. 8 minutes. Weather's deteriorating. I'm tracking lightning activity ahead." The first surface-to-air missile came as a smoke trail streaking toward our position before Torres could call it out. I threw the Apache into violent, evasive maneuvers, G-forces compressing my vision, while Torres deployed countermeasures, chaff, and flares designed to confuse incoming guidance systems. "So second launch, they have a lock." I dropped the Apache into a narrow canyon, flying between rock walls with barely 10 feet clearance on each side. The missile, unable to follow our abrupt course change, impacted harmlessly against the canyon wall behind us, sending a shower of stone fragments into our rotor wash. The target valley opened before us like a vision from hell. Smoke columns rose from burning vehicles, tracer fire crisscrossed the air like deadly fireworks, and explosions sent debris hundreds of feet skyward. In the center of the chaos, 492 American soldiers fought for their lives against overwhelming odds. Lifeline 1 Delta 6, be advised LZ is under direct fire, popping smoke to mark our position. Purple smoke bloomed in a clearing barely the size of a basketball court. Enemy positions immediately concentrated their fire on the marker, turning our landing zone into a maelstrom of bullets and RPG rounds. Angela, I need suppression fire on that eastern ridge while I bring us down. Roger, engaging targets now. The Apache's M230 chain gun opened fire, sending 30mm high explosive rounds into enemy positions with devastating accuracy. Torres was gifted at weapons operation her targeting solutions, placing each burst exactly where it would do maximum damage to enemy fighting positions while minimizing risk to friendly forces. I brought the helicopter down in a combat landing fast hard with zero margin for error. The Apache hit the ground with enough force to compress the landing gear struts to their limits, but we were down and intact. Load them up, I shouted over the intercom to the soldiers on the ground. 12 wounded soldiers sprinted toward us through incoming fire, their comrades providing covering fire from hastily prepared defensive positions. During the 90-second loading process, I watched 2 young privates take sniper bullets while helping more seriously wounded men reach our aircraft. One collapsed 10 feet from our door, his blood spreading across the dirt. The other made it inside, but left pieces of himself scattered in the clearing. Someone's children just died trying to save their friends, I thought, fighting equal measures of nausea and rage. This is what heroism costs. We're loaded, came the call from the ground. Liftoff under concentrated fire climbing, just enough to clear the valley walls before dropping back to treetop level. Behind us, enemy forces shifted their fire to empty air where we'd been seconds before. The flight back to base took 14 minutes at maximum speed. I set the Apache down at the combat surgical hospital, where medics immediately swarmed the wounded soldiers, working with the desperate efficiency of an emergency room trauma team. I didn't shut down the engines, fuel, and ammunition. I told the ground crew chief, my voice hoarse from shouting over combat noise. Fast as you can make it happen. Ma'am, maybe you should— There are 480 soldiers still dying out there, I interrupted. Fuel and ammunition now. The turnaround took 11 minutes record time for a combat refuel and rearm sequence. Torres climbed back into the co-pilot seat as we lifted off again, her face grim with determination and the beginning of exhaustion that would only get worse. How many more trips? She asked as we gained altitude. I ran quick calculations in my head. 39 more, assuming we can maintain 12 soldiers per load and assuming we don't get shot down. Each subsequent trip became more dangerous as enemy forces adapted their tactics and concentrated firepower on our landing zone. By the 5th trip, our aircraft was taking regular hits from multiple directions. By the 10th, an RPG explosion had spiderwebbed our primary windscreen. By the 15th, Torres had taken shrapnel in her left shoulder from a mortar round that detonated 30 feet from our position. How bad is it? I asked during our 16th extraction. Manageable, she replied, though blood was soaking through her flight suit and her face was pale with pain. Elena drew me a picture yesterday, a helicopter with 2 people bringing soldiers home. I told her that's what Mama does at work. By trip 18 at 11:42 hours, we had extracted 216 soldiers. The mathematics remained brutal. 276 soldiers still trapped, each trip taking longer as enemy resistance intensified and our aircraft accumulated damage. Then disaster struck on trip 19. A surface-to-air missile from a concealed position struck our tail rotor assembly with devastating force. The Apache immediately began spinning out of control, the horizon rotating violently as we plummeted toward Earth like a broken toy. Mayday, Lifeline 1 going down. Torres called over the radio while fighting to remain conscious against the centrifugal forces trying to tear us from our seats. This is it, I thought as the ground rushed up through our spinning windscreen. This is where everything I learned from Dad either saves us or kills us. The impact was crushing, harder than any landing I'd ever experienced. The Apache hit the ground with enough force to compress every shock absorber to its limit, bounced once, tilted at a dangerous angle, and finally settled, with the main rotor still turning. I hung in my harness, vision blurred but conscious. Torres was unconscious, blood running from impact injuries, but her breathing remained steady. Lifeline 1, Delta 6. We observed your crash. Can you respond? My hands shook as I keyed the microphone. Delta 6, Lifeline 1. We're alive, but aircraft severely damaged. Stand by for damage assessment. I began running through emergency checklists while Torres regained consciousness. The tail rotor was completely destroyed, twisted metal, where our anti-torque system should be. But the engines showed normal parameters, the main rotor appeared intact, and flight controls still responded to input. Sarah. Torres' voice was weak but alert. What's our status? Tail rotor's gone. How do you feel? Like I got hit by a freight train. She tried to move, winced from her shoulder wound and new impact injuries. Let me check the damage systems. Torres began working her way through diagnostic displays, her expertise with Apache systems invaluable in assessing our situation. What she found changed everything. Sarah, she said, her voice tight with a new kind of fear. Look at this. She pointed to a diagnostic image of the tail rotor assembly. Even I could see what had caught her attention: stress fractures in the mounting assembly that were too clean, too precise to be accidental damage. Those aren't battle damage marks, Torres said quietly. Someone weakened this assembly before we flew. The missile hit just gave it the excuse to fail. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Our aircraft had been sabotaged. Someone wanted this mission to fail, wanted those 492 soldiers to die. More immediately, someone had tried to kill Torres and me. Can we prove it? I asked, my mind racing through the possibilities of who could have accessed our aircraft. I'm downloading the diagnostic data to my personal device, Torres said, her fingers flying over her system's controls. If we survive this, we'll have evidence. If we survive this. I looked at the damaged displays again. Without the tail rotor providing anti-torque control, conventional flight was impossible. The Apache would spin like a top the moment I pulled collective power. But I had spent 23 attempts in a simulator learning to fly exactly this scenario. 22 failures had taught me what didn't work. One success had shown me what might. Angela, I'm going to try to fly us out of here. She stared at me. Without a tail rotor, that's suicide. I've done it before, once in simulation. The physics are identical. Easy, Sarah. Feel what the aircraft is telling you. I began engine restart procedures, my father's voice echoing in my memory. The twin turboshafts wound up normally, main rotor beginning to turn. Without anti-torque control, the fuselage immediately began rotating opposite the rotor direction, exactly as expected. Here was the moment of truth. Everything my father had taught me about listening to aircraft cues, about making small corrections instead of large ones, would either save us or prove worthless in the face of reality. I pulled collective power gently. Violent spinning began the instant we left the ground. But instead of fighting the rotation, I listened to what the aircraft was telling me through the controls, using tiny cyclic inputs timed to our spin cycle, creating lateral forces that partially counteracted torque while managing our rate of rotation. For terrifying moments, we accelerated toward an unrecoverable spin, the ground rushing up through our windscreen again and again as we rotated faster. Then, impossibly, I found the rhythm, small corrections timed to the aircraft's natural responses, working with the physics instead of against them. We achieved something resembling controlled flight, unstable, demanding constant attention, but airborne. Delta 6, Lifeline 1. I transmitted, fighting to keep triumph out of my voice. We're airborne and inbound for extraction. Have 12 soldiers ready for immediate loading. Lifeline 1, are you actually flying that aircraft? Affirmative. Inbound your position. Morrison had been monitoring our situation from base. During our second trip with the damaged aircraft, his voice came over the radio with new urgency. All available aircraft proceed immediately to Delta 6 position, using Lifeline 1's proven approach corridor. Coordinated extraction authorized. Within 30 minutes, Webb Palmer and Lieutenant Rodriguez were flying parallel missions using the route Torres and I had proven survivable at such terrible cost. Their undamaged aircraft could carry 15 soldiers each, while my damaged bird could manage only 8 per trip due to the loading difficulties caused by our continuous spinning motion. I completed 7 more trips with the destroyed tail rotor over the next hour. Each flight a masterpiece of precise timing and gentle corrections. Every landing was a controlled crash, every takeoff a victory against physics. Meanwhile, the coordinated team made rapid extractions. Webb 4 trips, 60 soldiers, Palmer 4 trips, 60 soldiers, Rodriguez 4 trips, 60 soldiers. At 13:55 hours, Major Robert Silva's voice came over the radio. All aircraft final extraction complete. Delta 6 reports all 492 personnel accounted for and evacuated. Mission complete. Every soldier is coming home. As I set the damaged Apache down for the final time, fighting to maintain control through touchdown, while Torres prepared to upload our evidence of sabotage to base computers, Silva keyed his radio one last time. Lifeline 1. You've proven that skill and determination can overcome any obstacle, including those placed by our own people. He knew. Somehow, Delta 6 had figured out what we'd discovered about the sabotage. The investigation that followed would trace the weakened components to Master Sergeant Robert Coleman, who had been receiving payments from a defense contractor that would profit from increased helicopter losses. Coleman's sabotage had been meant to ensure the rescue mission failed, generating demand for his employer's competing aircraft systems. Justice would come later. For now, 492 American soldiers were alive because 2 pilots had refused to let sabotage and physics have the final word. 6 months after the mission, I sat in Torres's backyard in Killeen, Texas, watching her daughters Sophia and Elena play on their swing set. We didn't talk much about what had happened in that valley. Some experiences are too large for words, too complex for casual conversation. But sometimes, Elena would look at her mother with the serious expression that 8-year-olds reserve for important questions and ask why Mama had to go away to work with helicopters. Torres would tell her about bringing people home safe, about the trust that exists between crew members, about the responsibility that comes with capability. Sophia, the more practical twin, usually wanted to know about the mechanical details, how helicopters fly, why they make so much noise, whether girls could be pilots too. Torres would explain the physics, the engineering, the simple fact that aircraft respond to skill and determination regardless of the pilot's gender. I kept the original diagnostic data from our damaged aircraft in a secure file, not as evidence Coleman had been convicted and sentenced, but as a reminder. Trust is the foundation of everything we do in aviation. When that trust is betrayed, people die. When it holds firm, impossible things become possible. That evening, as Torres and I sat on her porch watching the Texas sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and red, she asked the question that had been haunting both of us. Do you think your father would be proud? I thought about that for a long time, remembering wind shear and gentle corrections, remembering a teenage girl's panic and a calm voice teaching patience in the face of disaster. I think he'd say we listened to what the aircraft was telling us, I replied finally. And that we made the corrections we needed to make. Sophia ran up to us then, breathless with playground excitement. Mama Elena says helicopters can't fly upside down, but Captain Chen could do it right because she's the best pilot ever. Torres and I exchanged a look, the kind of wordless communication that exists between people who have shared impossible circumstances and survived them together. Flying upside down isn't the hard part, sweetheart, I told Sophia. The hard part is knowing when to make small corrections instead of big ones and trusting that the aircraft wants to fly as much as you want it to. That night, I drove home to my small apartment and sat looking at the photograph of my father in his flight suit taken during our last weekend flight together. For the first time since his death, I truly understood what he had been trying to teach me in that Cessna during those terrifying moments of wind shear. It wasn't just about flying technique or emergency procedures. It was about trust, trusting the aircraft, trusting your training, trusting the people beside you, and ultimately trusting yourself to make the right decisions when everything goes wrong and lives hang in the balance. The aircraft always wants to fly. Sometimes you just have to listen to what it's trying to tell you, make the corrections you can make, and trust that small adjustments guided by skill and determination can overcome obstacles that seem insurmountable. 502 people came home that day because a broken helicopter and 2 stubborn pilots refused to accept that some things are impossible. In the end, that might be the most important lesson of all.